Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The storm inside the Newman family reached a breaking point the moment J.T. Hellstrom, a man who had walked through hell and back, finally lost his carefully controlled composure and exploded at Victoria Newman, his voice echoing with the pain of betrayal, the frustration of truth long buried, and the desperate need to be heard as he stood in front of the woman he once loved, the mother of his child, and demanded answers about the staggering revelation that was unraveling before them, that evidence was surfacing which suggested Claire Grace, the fragile young woman Victoria had fought so hard to accept as her daughter and welcome into the powerful Newman fold, may have faked the very DNA results that had bound them together. A revelation that not only threatened to shatter Victoria's heart but also promised to detonate the delicate web of relationships, loyalties, and fragile forgiveness that had kept their world barely glued together. It began when whispers of inconsistencies in Claire's test results reached J.T., whispers he had at first dismissed because he wanted to believe in the redemptive story of a lost child finding her family, but the more he dug, the more the pieces refused to fit. And when he finally held in his hands documents that screamed tampering, his fury boiled over, not only because of what Claire had done but because Victoria had been blind to it all, or worse, had chosen to ignore the warning signs, and as he shouted, his words carried the anguish of years of mistakes, the rage of being manipulated, and the grief of realizing their lives might once again be spiraling into a cycle of lies that could destroy them all. Victoria, with her icy composure cracking under the weight of his accusations, tried to defend Claire, insisting that the girl had suffered enough and deserved love, not suspicion, but J.T. wasn't having it, slamming down the papers that showed irregularities in chain of custody logs, unexplained gaps in lab records, and suspiciously altered digital files that indicated Claire may have orchestrated a deception of monumental scale, perhaps with outside help, perhaps alone, and as the evidence piled up, Victoria's defenses weakened, her voice trembling as she clung to the memory of Claire's tearful confessions, her broken apologies, her need to belong, but J.T., hardened by experience, reminded her that the Newmans had been targets before, that manipulations had always come cloaked in vulnerability, and that loving a con does not make them less dangerous. His words cutting into Victoria's soul as she stood torn between the daughter she thought she had and the man who was demanding she face the possibility that it was all a cruel illusion. The fight was brutal, raw, and deeply personal, as J.T. hurled every ounce of pent-up anger at Victoria, not just about Claire but about the patterns of denial and self-deception that had haunted her for years, accusing her of once again letting someone dangerous into their orbit, someone who could wreak havoc on Reed, on the Newmans, on everyone connected to them, while Victoria, her voice breaking yet still defiant, accused J.T. of refusing to believe in second chances, of letting his bitterness blind him to the possibility that Claire's mistakes didn't erase her humanity, but the undeniable truth remained between them like a live wire sparking in the middle of the room. The DNA results that had supposedly proven Claire was Victoria's biological daughter could no longer be trusted, and if they were false, if the girl who had been embraced as a Newman was not who she claimed to be, then every moment of compassion, every decision made to include her, and every fragile step toward healing was built on a foundation of lies, and the fallout would be catastrophic, not only for Victoria but for the entire Newman legacy, because Victor Newman himself had already invested in Claire as the next generation's hope. Nikki had opened her heart to her granddaughter, and siblings like Nick and Adam, though cautious, had begun to form connections that would be irreparably scarred if it all came crashing down, while J.T., his chest heaving from the force of his anger, demanded Victoria look him in the eye and admit what deep down she already knew, that Claire was playing them, that Claire had manipulated their desperation for family, and that protecting her now would not only destroy Victoria's credibility but might also endanger the safety of everyone she loved. And as his words rang in the air like a gavel striking down a final verdict, Victoria's silence said more than any defense ever could, because in that silence lived the seeds of doubt, the fracture of trust, and the terrifying possibility that the girl she had called daughter was nothing more than a master manipulator with an agenda yet to be revealed. J.T.'s outburst did not end with a single shout. Instead, it snowballed into a relentless avalanche of accusations and truths too long ignored, his voice rising and falling like a storm surge as he paced the Newman living room, his eyes burning with fury and disbelief, telling Victoria that she had once again put her blind faith into someone who had not earned it, reminding her how many times in the past she had excused dangerous behavior, how many times she had tried to believe in the broken people who came knocking at her door, only for it to end in disaster, and he refused to stand by while she repeated the cycle with Claire, especially now that hard evidence pointed to the cruel reality that the girl had manufactured her place in their lives. The more he spoke, the more Victoria felt her chest tighten, her world teetering between collapse and denial, because as much as she wanted to scream back, to defend Claire with the full force of her mother's heart, the memories of odd inconsistencies began creeping into her mind, the way Claire had always shifted uncomfortably when DNA results were brought up, the way she had been almost too eager to accept the Newmans' love after so many years of estrangement, and the haunting flicker in her eyes whenever someone mentioned her upbringing with Aunt Jordan, a flicker that hinted at secrets yet to be revealed. And though Victoria wanted to drown those suspicions with the balm of compassion, JT wouldn't let her, his words crashing over her again and again like waves against rock, pounding away at her fragile defenses, shouting that the DNA tampering was not just sloppy work or an innocent mistake but deliberate manipulation, pointing out how chain of custody forms had been altered, how one lab technician had mysteriously quit the same week the results were finalized, and how metadata from digital copies revealed that files had been opened and edited on Claire's personal laptop, evidence that could not be ignored no matter how badly Victoria wanted to cling to her fantasy of reunion. And as JT shoved the printed documents toward her again, his hands trembling with rage, he demanded to know how she could still deny it, how she could still let Claire under the same roof as Nikki, as Victor, as their son Reed, without admitting the very real danger that perhaps Claire was not who she claimed to be, perhaps she was still carrying Jordan's twisted legacy in her veins, and perhaps she had orchestrated this entire scheme not out of love or longing but out of vengeance, a thought that left Victoria nearly gasping for air, because if JT was right, then every tear Claire had shed, every confession of regret, every trembling hug shared in the Newman ranch had been nothing more than a performance designed to infiltrate the family from within, and the idea that she might have opened her arms to a viper, welcoming her into the heart of the Newman empire, left her both shaken and furious, not only at Claire but at herself for being so easily deceived. JT, sensing her wavering, pressed harder, his voice softening for a moment as he told her that he understood why she wanted to believe in Claire, why she clung to the idea of a daughter returned to her, because he too had once believed in redemption, he too had once hoped that the people they loved could change, but reality had taught him the harsh truth that not everyone deserved a second chance, that sometimes the people who came to you broken were not looking to heal but to break you in return, and as he spoke, the vulnerability in his words revealed a deeper wound, the scars of his own mistakes, the years he had spent trying to atone for the damage he had caused Victoria, damage that had left them both forever changed, and in that moment his fury was not just about Claire but about the unbearable thought of watching Victoria repeat the same cycle of pain with someone else, watching her walk headfirst into another tragedy while convincing herself it was love or hope guiding her, when in truth it was denial, and though Victoria wanted to scream back that he was wrong, that Claire was different, that Claire's remorse was genuine, she could not ignore the damning evidence JT laid out before her, the undeniable proof that someone had tampered with the DNA test, that the truth had been bent to fit a narrative, and as the weight of that reality pressed down on her, her body trembled, her lips quivered, and for the first time since Claire had come into her life, Victoria allowed herself to ask the forbidden question, what if JT was right? What if the girl she had welcomed as her daughter was nothing more than a fraud, a skilled manipulator who had studied the Newman weaknesses and exploited them with surgical precision? And if so, then what was Claire's endgame? Was it money, power, revenge, or something even darker? The thought twisted through her mind like a knife, especially when JT reminded her that Jordan had raised Claire in a world of lies and vendettas, that her very identity was forged in deception, and that no amount of tears could erase the possibility that her entire connection to the Newmans was built on a foundation of forgery and malice, words that left Victoria collapsing into a chair, her face pale, her breath shaky, while JT stood over her, equal parts furious and desperate, demanding that she take action before it was too late, demanding that she reopen the investigation, that she confront Claire with the truth, that she stop sacrificing the family's safety for the sake of a bond that might not even be real, and though Victoria wanted to resist, to defend her daughter, the terrifying silence inside her heart told her she could no longer deny it, she could no longer brush aside the mounting evidence, and as the tears welled in her eyes, she realized that whether she wanted to or not, she would have to confront Claire, she would have to dig beneath the lies, she would have to risk shattering the fragile illusion she had been living in, because if JT was right, then the most dangerous enemy of the Newmans was not on the outside but already sitting at their table, calling her mother. The air in the Newman ranch grew heavier with each syllable that fell from J.T. Hellstrom's lips, his fury no longer a controlled simmer but a raging inferno that consumed every inch of restraint he had once tried to maintain, his voice carrying the jagged edge of betrayal and the searing burn of disappointment as he stood toe-to-toe with Victoria Newman, the woman who had once held his heart in her hands and now stood as the mother who, in his eyes, refused to see the most dangerous truth. Staring her down, because the evidence was mounting, undeniable and terrifying, that Claire Grace, the fragile, wide-eyed young woman who had cried her way into Victoria's life, into Nikki's heart, and into Victor's empire, had faked the very DNA results that bound her to them, twisting science and sentiment alike into a weapon of deception, and as JT roared his accusations, pacing the room with a wild, restless energy that betrayed just how deeply he feared what those revelations meant, he hurled every detail he had uncovered at Victoria, reminding her of the chain of custody gaps, the mysterious lab resignation, the digital fingerprints that tied the altered documents back to Claire's devices, all of it painting a damning picture of intentional fraud, not error, not accident, but calculation, a scheme woven with precision, and his hands shook with the sheer weight of anger as he slammed the printed evidence onto the coffee table. Between them, the pages scattering like shrapnel across the polished wood, each sheet carrying words and numbers that threatened to tear apart everything Victoria had dared to hope for, while Victoria, her composure fracturing like glass under a hammer, tried to gather her defenses, tried to insist that Claire's tears, her apologies, her pleas for forgiveness were genuine, that the girl had been through enough torment under Jordan's manipulation and deserved the chance to heal within the arms of her real family. But JT, his jaw tight, his eyes blazing, cut her down with the reminder that love and vulnerability had always been the camouflage of manipulators, that the Newmans had been targeted for decades by enemies who knew how to weaponize weakness, and that what Victoria was mistaking for redemption might only be another Newman downfall waiting to happen, his words piercing the marrow of her being as she faltered, torn between the daughter she had claimed and the man who was daring her to admit that she had once again been blinded by hope. The argument escalated like a storm in the dead of night, thunderous and unrelenting, with JT shouting that this wasn't just about Claire but about Victoria's pattern of denial, her history of letting broken people into her life and convincing herself she could fix them, only for those choices to detonate in ways that left scars on everyone around her. And though she tried to snap back, tried to accuse him of bitterness and cynicism, of refusing to believe in second chances, his voice cut through her defenses like a knife, reminding her of how many times she had paid the price for misplaced loyalty, how many times she had stood in this very room defending someone who later revealed themselves as a danger, and how this time the stakes were far higher because it wasn't just her heart on the line but the integrity of the entire Newman dynasty, because Victor had already invested trust, Nikki had already bared her soul, Nick and Adam had already begun the tenuous process of seeing Clara's blood, and if this all unraveled now, if the truth of forged DNA tests came to light, the fallout would not only humiliate the family publicly but would splinter them internally, leaving them vulnerable to enemies who thrived on exploiting such fractures, and JT, his chest heaving as though the sheer act of speaking these truths was both a purge and a punishment, demanded that Victoria stop hiding behind excuses. That she look him in the eye and admit what she already suspected deep inside, that Claire was playing them, that Claire's sudden insertion into their lives was not fate but fraud, and that every moment of compassion, every embrace, every fragile step toward healing had been laced with venom, and when Victoria, her face pale, her lips trembling, fell into silence, the sound of it spoke louder than any rebuttal, because in that silence JT heard doubt, in that silence he saw the cracks of realization forming. In that silence he knew she was no longer able to dismiss the possibility that she had been betrayed in the cruelest way a mother could be, not by an enemy at the gates but by the daughter she had brought into her home. JT pressed on, his fury now interlaced with desperation, telling her that if she didn't act now, if she didn't confront Claire, If she didn't demand the truth with the same ferocity she had once used to protect her father's empire, then everything they knew would collapse, because the most dangerous enemies were always the ones sitting at the table, the ones calling you family, and the longer Victoria clung to denial, the more power she handed over to someone who might very well be orchestrating the Newman downfall from the inside. And as he spoke, Victoria's thoughts spiraled, memories of Claire's carefully timed confessions, the odd nervous glances when DNA was mentioned, the eagerness to prove her loyalty, all of it flooding back with a sinister edge she had not wanted to see, but now could not ignore, and she found herself asking the questions she had buried for weeks. What if JT was right? What if the girl she had welcomed into her heart was a fraud? What if every hug, every tear, every whispered plea for forgiveness had been nothing more than a mask? And if so, what was Claire's ultimate plan? Was it vengeance for Jordan's twisted mission? Was it a hunger for Newman wealth and influence, or was it something darker, a psychological warfare designed to make the Newmans tear themselves apart from the inside? And the thought left her breathless, because the one thing Victoria feared more than betrayal was betrayal from within, and as she sat there, trembling, staring at the documents JT had scattered across the table, she realized that whether she wanted to or not, she could no longer avoid the truth. She would have to confront Claire. She would have to tear down the illusion she had been living in. She would have to face the very real possibility that the daughter she thought she had gained was nothing more than a master manipulator with a chilling agenda yet to be revealed. And though her heart shattered under the weight of that possibility, the tears forming in her eyes betrayed the horrifying truth that even Victoria herself could no longer deny. The DNA results were a lie, and the storm that was coming would not only redefine her family but might very well destroy it. The silence that followed JT's tirade felt suffocating. As if the very walls of the Newman ranch had absorbed the shock of his words and were holding their breath, waiting for Victoria to speak, to either unleash her fury or surrender to the truth. But no words came, only the tremble of her hands as she brushed against the scattered papers on the table, her eyes flickering over the damning lines of evidence she wished she could unsee. And JT, his chest still rising and falling like a man who had sprinted through fire, stepped closer, lowering his voice now not out of gentleness but out of urgency, telling her that denial would not save her, that love would not shield her, that she needed to face what was in front of her, because the longer she clung to the illusion, the deeper Claire's claws would sink into the Newman legacy. And Victoria, her throat tight, her eyes glossing with tears, whispered that she didn't know if she could do it, didn't know if she could look at Claire and demand the truth, didn't know if she had the strength to tear apart the fragile family she thought she was finally building. But JT, his jaw tightening, reminded her that strength wasn't optional anymore, that protecting their son Reed, protecting Victor, protecting Nikki, protecting even the siblings she often fought with required her to face the brutal reality. And though she shook her head, trying to cling to fragments of Claire's broken voice, to the trembling hands that had begged for forgiveness, JT cut her off with a reminder that manipulators always knew how to mimic desperation, that crocodile tears were their most dangerous weapons, and that every moment of compassion she had given Claire might have been nothing more than rehearsed theater, a performance perfected by someone raised under Jordan's twisted guidance. And those words sliced through Victoria's chest, leaving her breathless, because deep down she knew JT wasn't entirely wrong. She had seen flashes of darkness in Claire's eyes, shadows that no apology could quite erase, and now with the DNA evidence in front of her, those shadows felt less like scars of trauma and more like signs of deception. But even as fear quailed in her stomach, another voice inside her begged her not to give up, begged her to hold on to the sliver of hope that Claire's remorse had been genuine, that the family she thought she had gained was real. Yet the louder that voice grew, the harsher JT's reminder struck, his words echoing through the room as he told her that protecting Claire now wasn't compassion, it was negligence, it was endangering everyone they loved. It was giving Jordan's legacy one last victory from beyond the grave. And the image of Nikki embracing Claire as her granddaughter, of Victor speaking of her as the next generation's hope, of Nick and Adam, despite their doubts, slowly opening their hearts, all of it suddenly felt like a setup for devastation. And Victoria's tears finally spilled over as the cruel weight of it all crashed against her, because if the DNA results were false, then she had not just been duped as a mother but as a daughter, as a sister, as a Newman, and the ripple effect would destroy every fragile bond holding them together, handing their enemies the very chaos they had always craved. And JT, seeing her break, pressed his hand against the table, leaning in so close she could feel the heat of his anger, telling her that she didn't have to face this alone, that he would stand beside her if she chose to fight for the truth, but if she refused, if she chose denial again, then she would lose more than a daughter, she would lose the respect of her family, she would lose Reed's trust, she would lose herself, and that final blow landed like a hammer against her heart, leaving her gasping, because even though she wanted to argue, even though she wanted to insist that Claire's love was real, the hollow ache inside her told her otherwise, and as the storm raged silently in her chest, Victoria realized that the next move she made would not just define her relationship with Claire but would determine the survival of the Newman family itself, and though the thought terrified her, one truth rang louder than any denial could: she had to uncover what lay beneath the lies, even if it meant destroying the daughter she had only just found.